Hello everybody, welcome back to Black Book Stacks. I am your host, Toshonda Sanders. It has been a little while. I hope everyone is doing as well as can be expected. I am just checking in about one of my favorite reads that I think I've mentioned before, Gathering Blossoms Under Fire by Alice Walker. These are her collected journals. I understand there's going to be a volume 2. This is the collection that has been edited by the late, great Valerie Boyd. And before we get into it, I want to just say thank you so much for your donations, for your likes, shares, and subscribes. I really appreciate them. They help me keep the channel going. And it's been nice to add some new subscribers to the ranks and all of that. So really excited that you're here, really glad that you're a reader. And I know some of you are also writers, so really excited that you decided to support the channel, and so I really appreciate that. So I wanted to just give you a shout out for that. All right, so Gathering Blossoms Under Fire, the Journals of Alice Walker. What I first want to say about this is that I have been a huge fan of Alice Walker since the 80s. I discovered her, of course, through The Color Purple, featuring Celie and Shug and Nettie and all of the iconic characters that were created in The Color Purple. But I came to really appreciate her as an author, as an activist, as a humanitarian when I read In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which is her collection of essays about the creativity of Black women, the creativity of our ancestors, or our grandmothers, those who could not, who didn't have the luxury of creating art that would be valuable in the American marketplace, and so made things like quilts or cultivated gardens, and had these other acts of, I think what Alice Walker would call everyday resistance, and creativity, things that were useful and practical, but also allowed them to have a modicum of expression. So that was hugely influential to my writing life, to have this volume that really expressed things that I hadn't seen anyone else express, certainly not a Black woman. I would have been coming of age then. This is in the era of Toni Morrison. Of course, you can't really talk about Black women writing without talking about her, but I was thinking of Terry McMillan in Breaking Ice, which was her collection of short stories, but then Waiting to Exhale, and in the early 90s in particular, there was just this whole raft of Black women writing, like B.B. Moore Campbell and so many others who are unfortunately are no longer with us, but thankfully Alice Walker is still with us. So in these journals, she really it covers a time period from basically around 1965 through the late 90s, I want to say, early aughts. And I think it's from 1965 to 1999, roughly. And there's so much in there about her working out for herself financially, how she was going to make the writing life work, both as she goes from being married to Mel Leventhal, who's a civil rights attorney, and they live in the South. They have Rebecca, they get divorced. I don't really know about the chronology. And so, but I think they're still married when they have Rebecca, and then they get divorced. And then Alice goes on to have these, like a series of relationships. One of them is with Tracy Chapman, which I knew about, but didn't know a lot of the details of. And so some of those details are here. One of them is with a scholar, Robert Allen. And I think that's probably one of the longest and most significant relationships of her life. And then there is a flirtation dynamic with Quincy Jones, which surprised me. But, of course, she was working on The Color Purple, the movie, and he worked on the soundtrack. And so there was like this dynamic there that is evident in her journals, but I don't know how much of that was public knowledge beforehand. And then you also see something that I think she has communicated in the past, which is this ambivalence about the reception of Color Purple, the movie, which, the book itself actually takes form and takes shape in her journals. So it starts off being called something else, but she's just writing in her journal about having this idea for a book. And she writes, sort of the opening page from Seeley to God, which is this letter about, basically being molested and abused and all these things. And trying to sort of find her way to like become something other than what life seems to have deemed for her to be. So that was really fascinating to see, because I've been also keeping a journal since the 90s, and there have been times when I haven't written every day, but certainly a lot of gems, ideas, story ideas, thoughts that might turn into something else originate in my morning pages or in my journal entries. And so that was also really affirming and really fun to read and to see. There's interesting stuff in there about her relationship to Rebecca Walker, her daughter, and also just some things that, I think are gems for Black women writers to consider about how we show up for ourselves, what the relationship is to other people in terms of how they relate to us. Those things are really, I think, invaluable. And I think also the level of self-awareness, like just not really being seduced. I'm speaking of Alice now, like she's just not really seduced with the idea of fame or of being this well-known person. She really cares deeply about making a difference, about being a vessel really for her characters and for the work that she's meant to do. And so there's this laser focus on how to best be a catalyst for that, regardless of what the story takes or how the story unfolds. There is a sort of sense that I got reading it that The Temple of My Familiar was one of her favorite books to write, and it's one of my favorite books to read of hers, just because it's about, it's like it's all about like reincarnation and past lives and what has happened in the past and how it influences us in the present, which I think is just really valuable. And from a creative stance, it just felt like something that I didn't know Black women could do on the page. And so that was really fun to read at the time. I'm a little not sure how I feel about the stuff about warrior marks and female genital mutilation and that whole journey, possessing the secret of joy. I think it was important to know that was a practice, and it felt and still feels barbaric and unfair and like not something that any young woman should have to undergo. And at the same time, I'm sensitive to the fact that I don't know that part of the world. The parts of the world where that's practiced, I don't know a lot about it, and so I don't feel qualified to speak on it. So even after like reading Possessing the Secret of Joy, and being around for basically the controversy that it caused, right? Because the main criticism I think Alice Walker received as a result of wading into the world of female genital mutilation and taking it on as a cause is that she needed to stay in her lane as an African American who did not know what African people, women needed or are doing or any of those things. So anyway, you can make up your decisions about that. But I thought it was interesting to hear her side of that equation. I also thought there's some stuff in here about her correspondence, her letters, which are some of my favorite parts of the book, actually, because I do think, this is probably, so it's 500 pages. It includes an intro, obviously, and an afterword. And so I love to write letters, and I think I love reading the letters of other people to other folks, because there's something about it. Obviously, we all have email, we have text, and that's fine. But I think it's actually a really poor substitute for the time and energy it takes to think intentionally and slow down on the page to form the thoughts that you have, put them on paper, sit with them if you want, but you don't have to, and then physically mail them, wait for them to reach another person, have them digest it, right? That to me feels like one, a more natural process than what we do in terms of correspondence, but also it's such a writer thing, right? To transmit your thoughts and feelings in this way. And I actually feel like it's it's a skill that I know Alice Walker has, but seeing it in action as applied to other people is wild. So she writes a letter to Danny Glover because when the nominations come out, I guess the year after The Color Purple has dropped, he hasn't been nominated for anything, but he was amazing. And this is also in the context of people really trashing her for berating Black men, and which she doesn't. She tells the truth, but lots of criticism that she, mainly from people who I consider to be irrelevant, frankly, but who are just critiquing her success. I think, especially after she gets the Pulitzer, which she doesn't, she's kind of oh, I didn't even know that that was something that I could get, which is what? So anyway, she writes this letter to Danny Glover that's basically in my book, you get all the awards. Let me give you your flowers. Which is really beautiful and amazing, and it's dope to read. And then there's this eviscerating, hardcore, shots fired, flames throwing letter that she sends to the editors at Ms. because they were trash in terms of diversity, inclusion, representation. And they when they were representing pregnant women, they were no women of color. There's just only white women that they deemed acceptable to be on the cover. And she ripped them a new one over it in this letter that was I don't want to be affiliated with you guys if this is how you're gonna roll. And I know we've had this affiliation and our partnership has been amazing, but what is this trash? And I am so here for that. I was okay, don't hold back. Let them know how you really feel, So anyway, I think there's so much wisdom in it. I'll put it up again. First of all, I love this cover, which I've showed it to you guys before. I do feel a way, honestly, about why we do this. Because, obviously Alice Walker looked like this, I guess, in the 70s, maybe even the 80s. But now she's 70-something, 77, I believe, maybe a little bit older. And so I appreciate that, a pretty young face, sells books. And also, I also just want to acknowledge that, we can be beautiful at any age, and that it would be lovely for us to begin to like show women aging gracefully, to show them as they are, instead of sort of trying to freeze them in time when we thought they were most beautiful or most valuable. It's my little high horse. I'm gonna get off. I'm just gonna step down off that high horse. Anyway, if you made it this far, thank you so much for your patience, for your listening ear, for viewing the channel. I appreciate your support. I think I'm gonna, when I upload this, I'm gonna link, or I'll just share some of the titles that I mentioned from Alice Walker, because not everybody knows that she wrote other things beyond The Color Purple. She's actually pretty prolific as a poet, an essayist, a novelist. Now she's a blogger. I think it's called Alice Walker's Garden. And you should definitely check it out because it's really cool. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Happy reading. And I will see you again soon.